Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Hope you're having a good day today, wherever you are and whatever you're involved in. It's time to get back into our study of Moses in Exodus, and we are finding ourselves in chapter 32 of Exodus today. Um, this is the chapter about the golden calf, and last time we were together, we looked at chapter 32, verses 1 through 3. And so I'm not going to go back over those verses today in terms of the study, but I am going to read those first three verses today to give us the context of where we're going to start today with our lesson and our learning, which is going to start in verse 4 of chapter 32. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to Exodus 32, I'm going to start reading in verse 1. And as I mentioned the last time we were together, the title of this passage of chapter 32 in my Bible is the golden calf. And we talked last time how Moses, during his days with the Israelites, both in Egypt and in the wilderness and at Mount Sinai, that there were many high points and many low points. Uh, Moses seemed to be on this roller coaster with the people and with God because of the people. And sometimes he had great highs, the plagues in Egypt. Every time a plague happened the way that God said it would happen, had to be a high point for Moses. Of course, the day that they left Egypt and left slavery behind, another high point. The parting of the sea, a high point. The giving of the Ten Commandments, a high point. The manna, the water from the rock, and so on and so forth. These are all such high points for Moses. But there are also low points too. Low points in Egypt when the Israelites didn't really have any faith in Moses that he was going to actually be able to do what he said God had sent him to do. Low points when Pharaoh refused to listen to him, and I think the Passover itself was both a high point and a low point. A high point in that it was the final plague. It was the plague that resulted in their ultimate release from Egypt by Pharaoh, uh, and at a high point in that God was merciful through the blood of the Lamb to spare his people the death of their firstborn. But also a low point because it meant that there were so many people who would die because of the Passover. But now we get to the golden calf in chapter 32, and I think of all of the low points that Moses encountered and lived through and experienced in his time with the Israelites, that this was probably the lowest of the low. I can't imagine him feeling any more disappointed in the people than when he came down off of Mount Sinai and saw what they were doing and what they were involved in doing. After having just spent 40 beautiful days on the top of Mount Sinai, communing and speaking with God and hearing from God directly, to come down then, and you talk about going from a mountaintop experience to a valley experience. That was the ultimate in what Moses went through. And I think it was, of course, also the lowest point of all for Aaron as well, as he, as we shall see today in this study, was the one who actually crafted the golden calf. So for Moses and Aaron, and for the Israelites themselves, this golden calf episode, this encounter, this thing that they did in this chapter, reflected in this chapter, was certainly the lowest of the low for them in terms of their relationship with the Lord at this point, and for Moses in his relationship with the people. So, and then Aaron in terms of the way that he was trying to assist Moses and be his right hand man. So let's look at that then. Chapter 32, I want to just read the first three verses. Verse 1. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, remember he's been up there now for 40 days. Actually, he's been up there for 39 days at this point. The people had waited 39 days. If they had just waited one more, things might have been different. Things might have been okay. But after 39 days, they had reached the end of their ropes. They were impatient. They were tired of waiting. They were worried. They were stressed out. And they wanted to move on from Sinai. They wanted to move on. And not being sure what had happened to Moses, if he was even going to come back at all, they wanted to move on. And if it wasn't going to be Moses that would lead them, then they wanted someone else to lead them. They wanted a God. They wanted God to lead them if Moses was not going to do it. But they were tired of waiting. They just needed to wait one more day. So anyway, now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt." And note that because we're going to run into that phrase many times today in different ways. So this is the first time we hear it, and it is the people, the Israelites, saying to Aaron that Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. So now we're going to start with verse 4. Then Aaron took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. So this golden calf was was made out of solid gold. It wasn't a plating of gold. It was a solid gold calf. And notice there it says that he used an engraving tool. Now, if you remember when we talked about the altar that God told Moses to build, that the altar that God wanted to be built was to be made only with natural rocks and earth. And he specifically told Moses that they were not to use any. The actual word was sword, but many translations have it as a tool or a chisel. And so they had been instructed not to make an altar using an engraving tool of some kind. And so here is Aaron, who is now fashioning the golden calf using the same kind of implement that God had said not to use when making an altar for worship. And one of the reasons we said that God did not want any engraving tools, any tools to be used, a sword or whatever, in creating and making the altar is because he did not want them to worship the altar. And you can make an altar in such a way that it's so beautiful and impressive and overwhelming to you because of the way it's been designed, that you worship the altar instead of worshiping God through the altar. And so in a way here Aaron is kind of making an altar. The golden calf is, of course, they see it as a god, but if they're going to worship it, and he's fashioning it with a tool. So in a way he's kind of making the golden calf into an altar that's not only worship but will be sacrificed to. And so he's already kind of violating something that God had told them not to do. Don't use an engraving tool. And although this was not certainly something that God wanted them to worship or in any way to sacrifice to, still and all, I think Aaron at the time did not really think that what he was doing was wrong per se. I think maybe a better way to say it is he was hoping that he could get away with doing this and that God would see it as not being wrong. That's what a lot of us do in our lives, isn't it? We do something that in our hearts and in our spirits, deep down we know it's wrong, but but we do it hoping that God will give us grace and overlook it. That maybe what I'm going to do isn't really wrong, even though deep in our hearts and spirits we know it really is wrong. And I think that's kind of where we find Aaron here. He's kind of hoping what he's doing is not going to be seen as wrong by God or by Moses, but I think deep in his heart he still knew that it really was. And I think we're all guilty of that sometimes. So anyway, he goes on to say, so he made this cast metal calf using this engraving tool. And they said, quote, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." So here we have that phrase again, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. One thing I want to kind of look at to some extent here is in this verse 4, when it says, they said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Who is they? Who is they? It says, they said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Who is they? Who is they? Well, I think normally we would say they refers to the Israelites, the people themselves. That when Aaron finished making the gold calf and he presented it to them, that they said among themselves, "This is your God, Israel." I have a bit of a problem with that thinking, though, because we just read in verse 1, that the people, when they went to Aaron, said, "This is that the way they were brought out of the land of Egypt was through Moses." They were giving the credit for bringing them up out of the land of Egypt to Moses. And we know that this was the people who said that, the Israelites. But here in verse 4, they are saying, "This is your God who brought you up from the land of Egypt." So here, whoever is saying this is saying that it's that God brought them up out of the land of Egypt, not Moses. So I don't see the people changing their frame of reference so quickly and so easily, that in verse 1 it was Moses who brought them up out of the land of Egypt. In verse 4 it's a God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt. So I don't think it's the people who Moses is referring to here when he says, "They said, 'This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt.'" So a second possibility is that this was Aaron who said this, that Aaron was the one who said, because he was the one who made it, right? He was the one who made the image, the idol, the golden calf. And so, I mean, logically, you can see and think that when he finished fashioning the idol, that he presented it to the people, and he said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." And then maybe the they there is the people then repeating among each other what Aaron had said. So you have 2 million people there, right? Who are with the Israelites. And you can imagine that with that many people, that kind of thing would have to be repeated over and over again before all 2 million people heard the word that was proclaimed. And so, one way to look at this is that Aaron, after he finishes producing the golden calf, the idol, the image, he presents it to the people and says, this is your God Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. And then as they hear this, they repeat it among each other, word of mouth, as it were. And of course, like wildfire, word of mouth, it gets through 2 million people, like lickety split. And so that could be what they're talking about there. The other thing that you might think about is that that might be a kind of a good reason to think that this might be Aaron that says this, is because he's kind of transferring the credit of who brings them or who brought them out of the land of Egypt. When the people were saying to Aaron in verse 1, who brought them out of Egypt, they say it was Moses. But Aaron in verse 4 is transferring that credit. And he's not saying that it was Moses, his brother, that brought them out of the land of Egypt, but it was the Lord. It was God. It was a God. That wasn't, he's not, he's kind of saying, he is saying that the golden calf is the God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And that's not right. That's not true. But in his own heart and mind, because remember what we said last time is, Aaron is, his intention, I think, was to make a representation, an image of the God Yahweh who brought them out of the land of Egypt. So in his mind, again, Aaron is thinking that he is presenting to them an image of their God that did bring them up out of the land of Egypt. So in essence, in his mind, he is transferring the credit of bringing them up out of the land of Egypt from Moses to God. And you would think that it makes sense that Aaron's brother, who has been his right-hand man all along, who's been right there with Moses every time God talked to Moses, every time Moses raised his hand, his staff, in obedience to the Lord, that Aaron was right there beside him every step of the way. So Aaron knows that this was not Moses who did it, but it was God. And so you can see him kind of transferring that credit. But at the same time, by transferring the credit, he's also transferring the blame, I think. Because right now the people are kind of blaming Moses for leaving them there. They're feeling stranded. That Moses has brought us here, and he's gone up on Mount Sinai, and who knows what's happened to him. He's stranded us here. And so they're blaming Moses for leaving them at the base of Mount Sinai, at the bottom of Mount Sinai, not knowing where to go or how to get there or who to follow. And so by transferring the credit from Moses to God, then Aaron is also transferring the blame. He's saying, whatever's happening here that you're unhappy with, that's not Moses' fault. If you want to blame anyone, blame God. He's the one who brought us here, and he's the one who called Moses to the top of Mount Sinai. So I think that could be an argument, strong argument, for the fact that the they that's referred to here actually started with Aaron and then transferred to the people who then just by word of mouth talked about it. So that's the they, the word of mouth among the people, but that it originated with Aaron as the one who first said this. There's another option here that I think is interesting too. And the third option has to do with a Jewish tradition, a traditional Jewish understanding of something. And that concerns the two magicians who confronted Moses in Egypt when he was in Pharaoh's presence. If you remember, when Moses first encountered Pharaoh, Moses turned his staff into, or God turned Moses' staff into a snake. And there were two magicians there, Pharaoh's magicians, who also uh, turned their staffs into snakes. They counterfeited that miracle. And then we know from our study of the plagues that these same two magicians were able to counterfeit the first three plagues that God sent to Egypt. So in Jewish tradition, these two magicians had names. They were Jannes and Jambres. Jannes and Jambres. And in the Jewish belief and understanding, they think that Jannes and Jambres pretended to at the end of the plagues, at the end of the um, Passover, that they pretended to want to follow God. They pretended to want to follow the Israelites. They pretended that they were pretending that they had had a change of heart, and now they were devoted to and converted to the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith, and they believed in Yahweh, and they wanted to go with the Israelites and Moses when they left Egypt, and which is what they did. But also, as part of this, the Jewish belief is that these two then were not actual believers. They were just along to create problems and to set up obstacles for Moses along the way. And the Jewish thinking is that the two people who really instigated this whole golden calf thing, the two people who really were the movers and shakers behind this whole episode, were Jannes and Jambres. That they're the ones who said, "Hey, what's taking Moses so long? Why isn't he here? Has he stranded us? Why? Who's going to lead us now?" That they were the ones creating the problem. And so, if you look at it that way, you could then interpret that when it says, "And they said, 'This is your God, Israel, this golden calf, which Aaron just made. This is your God, Israel,' and they say, 'Who brought you up from the land of Egypt?'" So they're encouraging. So when you think about that, then you can see that Jannes and Jambres were encouraging the Israelites to worship the golden calf, knowing that it was the wrong thing to do, knowing that it would be displeasing to Moses and to Yahweh, and yet because they were still in Egypt in their hearts, and because this is the way Egypt had worshipped through pagan gods that had images and idols and representations of things on earth, like fish and bulls and those types of things, that they encouraged the Israelites to do the same. And the Israelites, still having some Egypt in their hearts, went along with this. And it was all instigated by Jannes and Jambres. So that's an interesting thing. So we don't know exactly who it was that said this, but whoever it was, they presented the golden calf and said to the Israelites, "This is your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So let's go on then. In verse 5, it says, chapter 32, verse 5, "Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it." And see, that's another reason you think, well, maybe Aaron wasn't the one who said it then, because now he says, "Now when Aaron saw this." Well, if he was the one saying it, then why is this like new news to him in verse 5? Now when Aaron saw this, well, if he was one that first said it, then he wouldn't be surprised by what he's seeing now. So this could go to, again, further the idea that it was Jannes and Jambres that actually started this and said this and encouraged this. And now that Aaron sees it's happening, he kind of jumps on board with it, as it were. Okay, so now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." The Lord there, in the other parts, in verse 1 and verse 4, when the word God is used, it is the God, the name of God, Elohim. Elohim. But in here in verse 5, when he says a feast to the Lord, the word used is Yahweh. And so what, again, this gets back to Aaron's intention. His intention was that this would be a feast to Yahweh, to the God who led them out of Egypt, to the God who was meeting with Moses at the top of Mount Sinai, to that God. And so, again, I think his mind was in the right place. Maybe his heart was in the right place, but it was still wrong what he was doing. And I think deep in his spirit and soul, he knew it. But he's trying to make lemonade out of lemons here. And so he says, tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh. Well, the people have something different in mind, don't they? Because the people are going to worship the golden calf. And that is a really obvious disobedience to the first commandment and the second commandment, as we'll see in a minute, to other commandments as well. And it's also interesting here that Aaron says tomorrow will be a feast to the Lord. Why tomorrow? Why did Aaron not want to do this, to have this feast and this feast to the Lord that day, on the 39th day? Why wait till tomorrow? Why did he want to delay a day is the question. Well, Jewish thought is that he was hoping that Moses would show up by the next day and handle this for him. He was kind of hoping if he waited a day that Moses would get him off of the difficult situation that he was standing on at that point in time. It shows, I think, too, in the back of his mind, again, deep in his heart, as we said several times, deep in his heart, that Aaron knew that this was wrong. And so he was hoping that if he could just put them off for another day, that Moses would come back in time down off the top of Mount Sinai, which remember at this point, Moses has gone up and down Mount Sinai several different times, many times up and down Mount Sinai. And so I think Aaron is thinking, if I can just put off one more day, maybe Moses will come back down from Mount Sinai and he'll get me out of this predicament in which I find myself. And so it was wishful thinking. But the problem is that although Moses did come back the next day on the 40th day, he did not come back quite soon enough. Did he? Yeah. So he was hoping that Moses would get there in time because he knew in his heart what he was doing was wrong. He was hoping it wouldn't be wrong. He was thinking maybe God won't see this as wrong, but deep in his heart, he knew that it was wrong. But he says, maybe if I can put him off one more day, Moses will come back down and rescue me from this situation, because Moses will handle it as Moses always handles everything. And that is true, isn't it? Moses always handled everything. We said in a lesson before this that Moses became the intermediary between God and man during his time leading the Israelites, and God handled everything for the people, which I think is why when he was up there for 39 days and he hadn't returned, that they panicked, because they'd had a Pharaoh to lead them, and now they had Moses to lead them, and if Pharaoh was dead and Moses was gone, then what were they going to do? And that panicked them to think about that. Okay, so let's go on then to verse 6. So the next day, they got up early. And again, Moses was coming down that day, but they got up at the break of dawn. They got up really early because they were excited to worship this God which Aaron had made for them. So they got up early and they offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and got up to engage in lewd behavior. To engage in lewd behavior. And the idea of that lewd behavior, the idea of that is that it involved sexual immorality. Sexual immorality. So they were basically copying the pagan religious rituals, which they had seen during all of their years in Egypt. That part of the worship was to eat and to drink and to basically have that kind of gross celebration, excessive in every way, too much eating, too much drinking, overeating, over drinking, over celebrating, and then getting involved in lewd sexual immorality and behavior. So this was terrible, what was happening. And I just wonder what Aaron must have been thinking as he looked on and saw what was happening, how he must have realized then that what he had felt deep in his heart, deep in his spirit, was coming true, that there was no way that Yahweh would approve of this kind of worship practice, that there's no way Moses would have said this was okay and acceptable. And just like our sin, when we commit it, even though we know it's wrong and hope it's not, and then afterwards we find out, it really was wrong, because sometimes there are consequences immediately for what we've done. In this case, Aaron got immediate consequences for what he had done. It's too late. It's too late. You can't undo it. You can't redo it. Now you just have to suffer the consequences of it. And I think that's where Aaron is at this point. So verse 7, then the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once, for your people whom you brought up from the land of Egypt. Okay, here we have that same wording again, brought up from the land of Egypt. Now God is saying, they're your people, Moses, not mine. You brought them up from the land of Egypt, not me. In other words, God is saying, I am done with these people. I am done with them. All that I did for them in Egypt, all that I've done for them since they left Egypt, all of the miracles that I've performed, all of the provisions I've made, all the mercy that I've shown. And here, 39 days after arriving at Mount Sinai, they're not only worshiping a golden calf, which breaks the first two commandments, do have no other gods before me and make no idols of gods. They're also involved in this lewd sexual immorality. And so God has had it. It says, Moses, if you want those people, they're yours. You can take the credit for bringing them up out of the land of Egypt, because I am washing my hands of them. I have lost my patience with them. And so it says that your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have behaved corruptly, and they have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. Now, if you remember back in chapter 24 of Exodus, if you want to look there just a minute, you can, or I can just read it to you. Exodus chapter 24 in verse 7, it says, then Moses took the book of the covenant and read it as the people listened. And they said, the same people that were worshiping the golden calf in this way, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, including the 10 Commandments, which they've heard at this point, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. We will be obedient. They didn't keep that promise very long, did they? They did not keep that promise very long. So they have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them, even though they promised me they wouldn't, even though they promised me they would be obedient, they haven't been. They have made for themselves a cast metal calf and have worshipped it and have sacrificed to it and said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." A breaking of the first commandment and a breaking of the second commandment. Verse 9. One thing I want to say is here, before we go any farther, when God says, they have quickly turned aside. In verse 7, it goes back to verse 7. I don't want to miss this. In verse 7, where he says, "Your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have behaved corruptly." Have behaved corruptly. I want to just frame this again. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I want to just kind of reframe it again. Think about where Moses is when the day 40 begins. He's been up on Mount Sinai with God for 40 days. He has received instructions on laws and the tabernacle. He has received the Ten Commandments on 2 stone tablets written by the very finger of God. And at this point, I'm sure he was so excited about what was happening. And I think he was looking forward to going back down to the people and telling them all of the things that he had heard from the Lord while he was at the top of Mount Sinai, that he had so many wonderful things to tell the people that God had said to them. And he was just, and he woke up that morning on the 40th day, and he couldn't wait to go back. He was on cloud 9. He was enthusiastic. He was excited. He couldn't wait to get there. He was just feeling so great about everything. And then the Lord says, "Go down at once, for your people have behaved corruptly." And can you just imagine what that did to Moses? I mean, again, mountaintop to valley, like that. Now, day 40 doesn't become a day of great celebration to Yahweh and all that he has done, but a day of disappointment and wrath and people being disobedient to the Lord, even though they said they would be obedient. Now, the Hebrew used there for behaved corruptly, we find this earlier in the Bible in Genesis, and it's the same Hebrew word that was used to describe the people of Noah's day before the flood, to describe what the people were doing and how they were behaving and what it was like for them in their culture and in their world before the flood happened. As a matter of fact, if you want to turn back to Genesis chapter 6 for just a minute, Genesis chapter 6, and if you want to look at verse 11, Genesis 6, verse 11, it says, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, I like to say behold means, can you believe it? And behold, can you believe it? It was corrupt, for humanity had corrupted its way upon the earth." And here he says in Exodus, they are behaving corruptly. So soon they had violated the promise that they had made to God, and now they were doing the same thing that the people of Noah's day had done. They were sinning just as badly as the people of Noah's day had sinned. And what happened to the people of Noah's day? They were destroyed through the flood, weren't they? God showed his wrath for their sinful behavior by sending the flood and destroying the people of that day because of the way that they were acting so immorally and so violently. And so you know, what we could find here is, when we get here in verse 10 in just a minute, that God has the same kind of reaction to the people of Moses' day that he had to the people of Noah's day, and that was in his wrath to destroy them. So let's look at that now. So it says, verse 9, then the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, they are obstinate people. Now God has even a different description for the people. Not that they are God's people, not that they're my people, not that they're your people, Moses, but now they are this people. So God has even taken a step further away from those people, saying, they're not my people, Moses. I wash my hands of them. They're not even your people anymore. The way they're behaving reminds me of the way people behaved back in Noah's day. So now they are those people. They're those people that are doing that thing that I so totally disapprove of. And he says, so this people, those people, they are an obstinate, a stubborn people. Verse 10, so now leave me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation. So he's basically saying to Moses, I'm going to make you a new Noah. You will be my new Noah. The people of Noah's day sinned in a way that was corrupt. I sent the flood and destroyed them, but I saved Noah and his family, and from them I created the human race that we now have on earth. From this one man and his family, Noah. I struck out in my wrath because of what the people of his day were doing. So I'm going to do the same thing now, Moses. I'm going to make you the new Noah. I'm going to strike out in my wrath against these people who are doing the same thing that the people of Noah's day had done. I'm going to destroy them just as I destroyed the people of Noah's day. I'm not going to use a flood to do so, but in some other way I'm going to do it. But I'll save you, Moses. And by implication, I think probably Moses' family. And from you and your family, I will create yet another generation of people to populate the earth. And so it's serious times here, very serious times. Verse 11, then Moses pleaded, he begged and pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt? Finally we get back to what actually was the truth. And the truth comes from Moses' lips. From Moses' lips. It wasn't Moses that brought them up out of the land of Egypt. It wasn't a golden calf god, small g, that brought them up out of the land of Egypt. It was God, Yahweh, God himself, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. So Moses says, God, remember, it was you. You did it. You brought these people out from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. So Moses is now kind of reversing his role here. Up until this point, most of Moses' time has been spent taking God to the people. He talks to God, God tells him what to tell the people, what to do with the people, and so Moses then goes to the people and tells them what God has said or what God wants to be done. And so Moses takes God to the people. But now in verse 11 here and in verse 12, we're going to see that that Moses reverses the role now. So now he is taking the people to God. Moses is now taking the people to God. And I wonder which is easier. Was it easier to take God to the people and tell the people what God wanted them to do and how to be obedient to him? Or was it more difficult, or was it easier to take the people to God and to say, God, please have mercy upon those obstinate people, because you know what? They really are still your people, and you're the one who brought them up out of the land of Egypt using great power and a mighty hand. So he's just saying to God, uh, you know, this is something that you did, and because you are the one that brought them up out of up out of the land of Egypt, using great power and a mighty hand, miracles and wondrous things, that because you did this, God, basically what Moses is saying is, because you did this, God, for these people, they are now your responsibility to take care of and to get them to the promised land, which you said you would do, which you promised you would do. So Moses here is just reminding God of the promises that he has made through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to take the people to the promised land. And I wonder, did God really need this pep talk? Did God really need this pep talk from Moses? Or is it possible that God is just testing Moses here? Is it possible that God is just testing Moses here? That God was not going to really destroy his people, but he wanted to see how Moses would react to the threat that possibly God might destroy them. Um, and maybe he's saying to Moses here, Moses, you make the decision. Do I destroy them or do I save them? Do I destroy them because of what they're doing, like I did the people of Noah's day and make you a new Noah? Or do I save them? Do I show mercy to them? And the question is, will Moses be the good shepherd to these stubborn, obstinate people, even when it's difficult to do? Because it is going to be difficult to do, and God needs to make sure that Moses is up to the task of being a good shepherd to people who are like that. And so this is a good test to see how Moses will react to this test. And he responds very well. Look at verse 12. Moses continues to speak to God. Why should the Egyptians talk, saying, with evil motives he brought them out, to kill them on the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent of doing harm to whose people? Not my people, not those people, but doing harm to your people. So, and then he says, verse 13, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, Jacob, your servants, to whom you swore by yourself, and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all this land of which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. Verse 14, so the Lord relented of the harm which he said he would do to his people. So Moses is concerned about a couple of things here. And I think if we really look closely at what Moses is saying in these verses and Moses' argument to God, is Moses isn't really asking for God to save the Israelites because the Israelites deserve it. That's not an argument, because they don't deserve it, right? He's not saying to God, God, please save these people because they're good people. They've obeyed you. He can't argue in any way that these people in any way deserve to be saved. But so what he does is he is concerned about God's reputation, about what destroying the people would do to the way the world looks at the Lord, especially the people in Egypt. So he frames the argument of, God, these people don't deserve it. I know that, but think about what destroying them would do to you in terms of how you're perceived here on earth by people. He says the first argument he makes is, you brought them out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and with great power. And the implication of that is, why did you do all of that? To then just destroy them? I mean, that was just a waste of effort and a waste of miracles and a waste of all that happened. Now, if you destroy them here, that all meant nothing. And instead of being spoken about as the greatest thing that you've ever done up to this point in history, is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, it'll be spoken as a curse and a terrible thing that you did. And the second argument is, why give the Egyptians a chance to gloat over the fact that even though God delivered these people, your people, his people, from us here in Egypt, all he did was take them into the wilderness and destroy them there. Can you imagine what the Egyptians are going to say about you? And what your reputation would be with them? I mean, why did we go through all the plagues? To impress them and to show them who is more powerful. You were Pharaoh, you were their gods, just to bring your people here, then destroy them here. This hurts your reputation. You'll become kind of a laughing stock among the Egyptians. And then third, which I think is the most powerful argument, is because he says, you made a promise, you made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you would bring these people to the promised land and let them inherit it. And if you destroy them, then they won't receive the promise that you had made to them. And so are you going to do this and then hurt and destroy not just the people who are disobedient, who do deserve it, but you are going to destroy your own reputation among the Egyptians and among the world at large? And so here we see in these verses both the justice of God and the mercy of God. The justice of God and the mercy of God. Because the God of justice says, this is what these people deserve for worshiping the golden calf and acting corruptly. They've broken, and think about when they're acting corruptly and the sexual immorality, not only now are they breaking the first commandment and the second commandment of having a God before Yahweh, and of making an idol of God, but they have now also, I'm sure at this point, committed adultery, and they've broken the commandment about not being covetous, not coveting. And so they've broken several commandments at this point, not just the first two. And so in God's wrath, as a result of that disobedience, they should receive judgment and death. But we also see here now the God of mercy. Verse 14, so the Lord relented of the harm which he said he would do to his people. The God of mercy, God relents. He does not give these people what they deserve. He has mercy upon them. He gives them grace. And this is what God does for us too, as believers in Christ. We deserve to be destroyed. We deserve to have been on that cross that Christ went on for us. But God in his mercy did not give us, and in his grace did not give us what we deserve, but gave us mercy. He didn't judge us. As long as we accept Christ as our Savior, he forgives us and gives us grace, even though we really didn't deserve it. So that's what's going on here. Let's finish off this section, and then we'll finish off and come back to the rest of chapter 32 next time. Verse 15, then Moses turned and went down from the mountain the 40th day with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides. They were written on one side and the other. I'm not going to go into that today. Next time we get together, I'll go into the 2 tablets. I think there's something really significant there about the way the tablets were written on and the way that they were given to Moses. We'll go into that next time. Verse 16, the tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. God himself with his finger engraved the 10 commandments on those 2 stone tablets. Verse 17, now when Joshua heard, now remember, Joshua's been waiting for Moses too. And if you remember, the way we looked at it is that originally Moses went up, and Aaron and Joshua and the 70 elders. and they went up a certain distance onto Mount Sinai. And then later, a few days later, Moses and Joshua went up even higher, and they waited there for 7 days. And then on the seventh day, Moses was called to go up to the top by himself. So for these 40 days, Joshua has still been waiting there near the top of Mount Sinai, waiting for Moses to come back down. And finally, on this 40th day, Moses comes back down and meets Joshua there near the top of Mount Sinai. So it says, now when Joshua heard, so Joshua's there waiting, and so Moses comes down, and Joshua hears the sound of the people as they shouted during this corrupt behavior. And he hears the sound, and he said to Moses, there is a sound of war in the camp. You see, Joshua was a man of action. He was a military man. And so when he hears that sound, this cacophony of noise that's coming from the camp of the Israelites, he assumes that it's some type of a war, some type of a battle, some type of military action. And I think he's fearing that he is missing it, that he needs to get down there and help the people fight this battle, whatever it is. And so he says there is a sound of war in the camp. But Moses said, it is not the sound of the cry of victory, nor is it the sound of the cry of defeat, but I hear the sound of singing. I hear the sound of singing. Moses knows what's going on. God has already clued him in. And so he knows what's happening, and he knows it's not a sound of war. It's not a sound of victory. It's not a sound of defeat. He knows they're behaving corruptly, that they're worshiping the golden calf. They're sacrificing to this false god. And Moses says, it's not a war, it's not victory, it's not defeat. I think he was saying, I wish it were. I'd rather it be a sound of war than a sound of singing. I'd rather it be a sound of victory than a sound of singing. I'd rather it be a sound of defeat even than the sound of singing. Because the sound of singing is something even worse than being defeated in battle. The sound of singing is being disobedient to the Lord our God and not following him in the way that they promised that they would. And now Moses experienced the lowest of the low during the time that he is with the Israelites as he comes down from Mount Sinai. Aaron is feeling the same kind of feeling at the bottom of Mount Sinai. And the next time we get together, we'll find out what happens as Moses and Aaron reunite at the bottom of Mount Sinai and they confront the people, and God deals with them. As difficult and as harsh as it might have been or it's going to be, it's still a merciful thing because he didn't destroy them. He did not make Moses a new Noah, but he's going to have mercy and allow them to continue on in the hands of this good shepherd Moses, who's already proven that even when the people are stubborn and difficult, he's still going to be the intermediary between them and God and try to rescue them and help them and get them to the promised land. So we'll pick that up next time. We'll talk about the 10 Commandments a little bit more on those 2 stone tablets. That's an interesting thing to talk about. Until then, may God bless you and may you have great days.